Hello, everyone. Pastor Kevin Rivers here. Welcome to Digging Deeper, Volume 1, Episode 1. We are here to just bring as much content into your home as we possibly can. And so what we want to do each week in this series called Focus, where I am looking at how Jesus stepped into uncertain times with specific focuses and how he still does the same today. We want to bring some digging deeper material. So we'll take Sunday's message and I'll expound on some points that were made or bring some new points to you so that you can discuss them in your life groups, in your homes, and we've got great questions that go along with that. In fact, for all age groups, if you go to our website, blackhawkministries.org, you'll find Your Guide to Church Online, a big blue button there. We have resources for all ages. And then this digging deeper material, not only will I be sending you a video like this, but we also have Pastor Steve Webster and a team that he has built that is putting together great content that just includes 12 to 15 questions that you can use in your life groups or your families, just to ask questions specifically about each week's sermon. That gets posted Sunday afternoon right after I preach it. And so we're excited to bring that to your home. A few ways you can find that content. Other than this video, you can find those questions by looking at the comment sections. Where applicable, depending on what you're watching this through, we're going to post this week's link in the comment section. You can also go to the adult section of the Your Guide to Church Online on our website, blackhawkministries.org. And then you can also get it through our weekly Tuesday In Case You Missed It email. That's an email that shows our finances and has the sermon link, and the digging deeper questions will be there as well. If you don't already get our weekly email updates that come out by Tuesday mornings each week, you can go to blackhawkministries.org, scroll to the bottom, you can sign up for our emails there and our text messages, all there. And so that's what we're here to do. I can't wait to share with you a little bit about Mark chapter 1, verses 40 through 45. This last Sunday, I talked to you about Jesus healing the leper in Mark chapter 1. And in this sermon, and in every sermon of this series, I'm going to give you two things. I'm going to give you a focus that Jesus had, and then I'm going to give you a phrase that Jesus used. So this last Sunday, the focus Jesus had was on God's people, and that people ended up being a leper, one who had leprosy. And there's all kind of Levitical laws that dominated how a leper could operate and could not operate. And so Jesus touched this leper is the story that we looked at. And so his focus was God's people, even though it oftentimes went against the protocols, processes, and procedures of the day. And his phrase was, I will. Because in verse 40, let me read to you the passage, Mark chapter 1, verses 40 through 45. And a leper came to him, imploring him, and kneeling said to him, If you will, you can make me clean. Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand and touched him, and said to him, I will, be clean. And immediately, verse 42, the leprosy left him, and he was made clean. And Jesus sternly charged him and sent him away at once, and said to him, See that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer for your cleansing what Moses commanded for a proof to them. But he went out and began talking freely about it, and to spread the news, so that Jesus could no longer openly enter a town, but was out in desolate places, and people were coming to him from every quarter. I love verse 45, and I spent a lot of time on it on Sunday because that's the gospel. Jesus took the leper's place. Because of Leviticus 13, the laws were this guy had to proclaim his uncleanness and have no proximity with people, so he had to stay out in desolate places. But at the end of the story, Jesus had to stay out in desolate places, and this leper could go into the city because the clean Jesus touched the unclean leper and made him clean. Powerful stuff there. But as we look at that, we looked at how Jesus made it so that this leper, we don't even know his name. This leper who had no name came to the name above every name. And because he met Jesus, his identity was no longer consumed by his issues, and his isolation became intimacy with the God who created him, all through Jesus Christ. And so we unpacked that on Sunday, but a couple of questions I'll pose to you to dig a little deeper. There's always content that I always have way more than I can ever preach to you, believe it or not. Some of you think I'm long-winded, but I always have way more as I study God's Word, and there's just so much there. We can never uncover it all, and so that's why we're doing Digging Deeper. But let me ask you, where was Peter? If the disciples were with Jesus in this season, where was Peter? The same Peter, where was the guy that would eventually cut off Malchus's ear in John 18? Where was the guy that Jesus would have to look at because he told him, I'm going to die and be raised again? And Peter in the Greek said, ume, no, never, a double negative, emphatic negative, no way, no how will that ever happen to you, Jesus? To which Jesus in Matthew 16, verse 23, told him, get behind me, Satan. You're a stumbling block to me. Where is that Peter? And I think the answer to that question is that Peter's right where we are. The disciples that were with Jesus, seeing him walk to the leper, seeing a leper come towards Jesus, breaking all kinds of rules, were learning. They were probably pretty bewildered. And, when I think about the disciples, they constantly saw Jesus break process, procedures, and protocol to focus on people. And as Jesus focused on people, he taught them what mattered in life. So they were learning. They were probably in shock as Jesus and the leper saw their paths converge. And throughout this series, you're going to see phrases like what you'll see in Mark chapter 2 that we'll look at next week. Phrases like, and they were all amazed. We'll talk about that this Sunday. But it truly is amazing that God would choose to step into our mess. And so here's the digging deeper question, the digging deeper thought that I didn't spend a ton of time on Sunday. I spent one or 2 minutes Sunday, but I want to spend the rest of our time talking about this question of how can a good God allow bad things? How can a good God allow a bad pandemic in our life? How can a good God even let this man have leprosy to begin with? And passages like this one, we see Jesus focus, we see his phrase. He said, I will make you clean. They reveal God's greatness because he's got the power to heal, but they also reveal God's goodness, that he's got the compassion and the grace and the love to be willing to heal. He said, I will heal you. And his greatness is seen in verse 42. He healed him. Immediately, the leprosy left the man, and he was clean. But his goodness is also seen, and we often miss that. So how can we find, get this question, how can we find God's perfect balance of greatness and goodness? His power and his grace. How can we find that, especially in times of crisis like the ones we find ourselves in today? How can God still be good when bad things happen? And as we look at this question today, I think it leads us straight back to our passage. God's greatness is clear in verse 42. It's easy to believe in that. Well, if he can heal a man with leprosy, then obviously God is great. He's got a ton of power. But so many times we skip just to that and saying that God's so good, he could stop this pandemic. But we miss verse 41 because going back to verse 41 is after the leper had implored of him and kneeling and humbled himself before him. He said, if you will, you can make me clean. Verse 41 says, moved with pity, he stretched out his hand and touched him and said, I will be clean. And it's verse 41 that shows us the goodness of God that truly is the foundation for the greatness of God to become a demonstration of God's power as we study this. And I want to talk to you about that phrase, moved with pity. Verse 41, he was moved with pity. The Greek word there is orgidzo, and when you look at that meaning of that word, it really means to make angry or become provoked. It's like a gut, bowels level feeling. A lot of English words don't even do justice to some of the Greek words, and this is one of those. Jesus was indignant and angry towards that which gripped this man that he loved so much, and he was moved with pity and compassion and grace, but that goodness of God flowed through the greatness of God, where he was even moved to anger and wrath towards that which caused this man so much pain. But the thing is, not only did Jesus see the need for his greatness, he in goodness responded. And so a lot of times when people talk about the goodness of God, is God good even when bad things happen? How do those things coexist? We'll say things like, well, that's not fair. To which you may say, it's just not fair what God has allowed in this pandemic. And I would say, I agree, God's not fair. I'm actually glad God's not fair. And I think this concept of the problem of evil, which scholars and theologians have written books and books. C.S. Lewis wrote a book, The Problem of Pain. There are so many books like that that are out there today, and they've been debating it for centuries of how to answer that question. So it's a good question for us to ask. But I think it boils down to a question of focus, which is just so happens to be what the series is all about. This question of focus. I think where your focus is will determine how you view the greatness and the goodness of God converging and colliding. So in this story, as an example, when you talk about what you focus on and the fairness of God, well, you might say, well, I'm going to focus on the fact that the man had leprosy, even though God was powerful enough to keep this man from having leprosy. This man had leprosy even though God could have prevented it. You could focus on that. Or you could focus on the fact that even though this man, like we do, lives in a broken, sinful, fallen world, that sin entered the perfect creation of God and marred it, and because of that there's disease and there's pandemic and there's leprosy, you could change your focus to the fact that Jesus saw the man in his mess and touched him anyway. So this idea of God's fairness and the goodness and how could God be good in the midst of bad things really boils down to, what do you focus on? I don't know about you, but I don't want God to be fair. When I think about that, I think about that fair would be getting left in our mess, but God unfairly sent Jesus into that mess. Fair would be the pain of this world becoming permanent, but God instead, through his grace, makes it temporary, because he sent Jesus into the pain of the world to take on our pain, and one day he will permanently delete pain. Fair would be our problem remaining our problem, but God unfairly sent Jesus and made our problem his own. And so I don't know about you, but I'm glad God's not fair. And in this story, we see his goodness and his greatness converging. And it's the goodness of God in verse 41 that's the foundation for the greatness of God to become a demonstration of his power, in that this leprous man was healed. And think about my son, Caleb. When he was a little guy in diapers, I still remember a season where his little diaper booty was standing right in the middle of a huge pile of glass. He had dropped something, and he was, I don't know how old, just a few years old, and he was crying and he was scared, and we were like, no, stay there, don't move, because he was in such a mess and he couldn't move. And I had bare feet, I had no shoes on, and there's no time for that. Instead of running away to get shoes, what do you think I did as his father? I stepped in as little as I could, making sure I didn't cut my feet as best as I could, but I picked that boy up and I pulled him out of that glass and that mess. And that's exactly what God does for us. Fairness would be saying to us today, you know what? You got yourself into this mess. Get yourself out. You think I said that to my son? No way. I love him too much. And that is what God does for us. He entered our mess. And that is why we can focus on the fact that he is still good. He is still good, even when you don't see him use his greatness the way you think he should have. So, application question for you now is, how can you give some unfair grace to those in your household and beyond? How can you give some unfair grace to them? But be careful, be warned, this kind of grace, as we saw this last Sunday and as we see in this passage, that kind of grace is contagious, and it's going to infect everybody around you. And that's the kind of thing this world needs today. And Jesus in this passage provides us with an identity that's way bigger than our issues. He provides us with intimacy that goes far beyond our isolation. And so there's a great list of questions. I'll give you a couple of them that are from the Digging Deeper content that we have. A couple of my favorites were, number 13 was, how might you put the proximity producers that I gave you on Sunday into practice in your life this week? Which of them do you think you need the most? If you don't know what proximity producers are, you can catch our sermons and see the whole thing, blackhawkministries.org/sermons. Or number 15, how does Jesus take the leper's place at the end of Mark 1? How does this help you understand the gospel better? I pray that as we've dug deeper today, you do understand the gospel better. Now, go discuss it. Go find the other 15 questions. Discuss it with your family. Discuss it with your life group. And we're going to keep digging deep into God's word together. God bless you. I'll see you soon.